Welcome to the webinar on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are going to be the next big thing. OEMs, startups and governments have committed their part in this new journey of electric vehicles. But there is a huge gap between demand and supply of skilled labor in this industry. We at Rosefield Energy Tech have embarked on an ambitious journey to fill this gap. We have various initiatives like Rosefield trainings, webinars, workshops, events, conclaves, and many more coming soon on electric vehicles. I am sure this webinar is also just the beginning of your journey in electric vehicles. If you have not yet joined the WhatsApp group, there is a link below the video. Please click on the link and join the WhatsApp group. We have some interesting announcements coming soon on WhatsApp. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Shailendra Gokhale. Shailendra Gokhale is the founder and director of Rosefield Energy Tech and also managing partner at Rosefield DA International. He is a highly experienced energy professional with broad international experience. He is also a well-known speaker at international conferences. I now invite Shailendra for setting the context and give us few insights into the world of electric vehicles.
Good evening, good afternoon and good morning everyone. I understand that there are participants not just from India but also from USA, Canada, Europe, Middle East, Africa and Asia Pacific. Such a fantastic response coming from thousands of you participants also go to show that EV is going to be next big thing. And would like to express my sincere thanks to all of you. We will try to cover as many aspects as possible in the webinar today. So our webinar is structured in three parts. So first part, I will give you a context that why EVs are going to be critical for the world. Then the second part, we will be talking about EVs, why they are critical for India. And then we will get into a conversation with our key expert from the electric vehicle industry, Mr. Suhas Joshi. But before coming into that, let me just set a context. Is that why we are talking, why world is talking about electric vehicles, why in India, probably over the last 4 to 6 months, we have been seeing a lot of action in the media, a lot of announcements are coming in terms of investment. And we need to understand that why we are all talking about electric vehicles. So globally, if you really see in last 15 months, we have seen huge disasters. And while we say that they are natural disasters, they are all coming because of man-made global warming. So global warming has its own effects. So whether we are talking about bushfire in Australia last year, or we are talking about hurricanes in USA, windstorms in Europe, very recent floods and even the cyclones in India, earthquakes in various parts where they had never seen earthquakes. And also, as you would have seen, that the Texas winter storm. So these are all affecting all of us. And I would also say that it is manifesting into not just rising sea level or melting of ice or having impact on environment, but the effect can be seen on food security. So the moment we start seeing the change in taste of our mangoes, probably we will realize that, wow, this is the effect. And we obviously do not want to get into that. And it is very important for us not to just think about impact on environment for our generation, but our next couple of generations, because they are going to bear the brunt of the misuse of the natural resources, what we are doing, or the way we have treated the environment. So against that backdrop, obviously why we are talking about global warming means, the leaders across the world realize that they need to come together and they need to show a collective commitment. And that's where the Paris Agreement in 2015 was signed by almost all global leaders of the world. And what do they mean? Their commitment is limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And before end of the century, they still want to limit up to 2 degrees Celsius. So when we talk about global warming, we are talking about the greenhouse gas emissions. And this greenhouse gas emissions basically come from CO2, methane, etc. But CO2 contributes almost 76% of the total GHG emissions. Out of that, the majority CO2 comes from fossil fuels, hydrocarbons. And then what are the sectors which are contributing to the CO2 emissions? Transportation and industry. So obviously we all should realize that if we don't really get to transportation, minimize usage of hydrocarbons, we will otherwise contribute to the GHG emissions, and ultimately it will lead to the global warming. So it is important that we should minimize coal, crude, gas, which are hydrocarbons, to the renewable energy sources like wind and solar. And I think a lot of investments are happening towards that. India certainly is now investing a lot into solar and wind. We will come to that little later. But when it comes to the India's commitment, why we are showing so much commitment now? Because we are the third largest producer of CO2 emissions, which is obviously not good for our planet, for our next generations. If we look at globalization and the motorization, what we have seen is that India today has 70. When I say 70 motorization, that means 70 out of 1,000 people own the vehicles in India. What is US motorization? There are more than 800 people who own the vehicles among 1,000 people. China, it is 200 plus. So India has still long way to go, and with rising middle class population and income, we are just going to see increase in the vehicles, which would mean that we are going to emit CO2. We are going to pollute the air, which obviously we can't afford, and there is cost to it. And what is the cost of that, of poor air quality, is when we look at in terms of economics, then the economic loss for India is close to 37 billion. India as a country, we need to do something to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And transportation, obviously you can't stop. You can't say that we are going to limit number of cars coming on the road, but we need to find out the way more on the cleaner side, how we can really help environment to become clean. Another reason for India to reduce fossil fuels is our over dependence on the oil and gas. India had spent almost $100 billion last year on importing the crude oil, and we import around 84% of total crude oil requirement of India. When there is 84%, we obviously can't afford. 100 billion is a big number. That means again, we need to find out the solution to it. We may not be able to completely replace the 84% of imports, but whichever way we can reduce the dependence of fossil fuels. There is obviously one way of doing that is to moving into cleaner fuels, completely renewables like solar and wind. And another way is obviously the electric vehicles. So now we are getting into a very, very interesting part. To start with, we will look at how globally EV industry is doing, and then we will come to India. So when we talk about global EV penetration today, there are around 10 million cars which are running on the world roads. If we talk about the countries or regions, today China and now Europe have taken very dominant position. So they are very, very strong markets for electric vehicles. Not to suggest that USA is far behind. They are also going to close in very quickly, with companies like Tesla and General Motors investing a lot into electric vehicles and the infrastructure around electric vehicles. So these three regions are definitely showing big promise in electric vehicles. And if we really talk about the last 5 years, when 2015 electric vehicles, we were just looking at less than 1%. of the market share. It was probably around 0.5, 0.6% of the total production of the vehicles in that year. And now when we look at 2020, we are already looking at 4.6%, and in 2021, it is expected that electric vehicles are going to have a share of 5%, which means that in last 5 to 6 years, electric vehicle sales have gone up 10 times. So this year, or when I say this year, it's 2020, basically there has been a huge drop in overall sales of vehicles. They dropped by 16%. But when we look at electric vehicles, story is completely different. Actually, electric vehicle sales have gone up by a whopping 41%. Because initially 0.5% going to 1%, 2%, we always will see a lot of resistance because there is not enough infrastructure which is built for electric vehicles. But when it goes to 5% and when you see 10 times increase in the vehicle sales, it is going to attract a lot of companies into it. In fact, when we look at the global companies like Volvo, they have already announced that by 2030, they will make only electric vehicles. Volkswagen is talking about 70%, and so are other American and European companies, car companies, are talking more about electric vehicles. There is also EV 30 at 30, which means that many countries are signing to the policy of EV 30 at 30. That means by 2030, 30% of the total vehicles will be electric vehicles. So India is also signatory to it, and so are many other countries. So when we look at even country-wise data, what we have seen is that, no surprise of course, that majority of countries in the Europe are definitely showing a huge growth numbers. Countries like Finland, Sweden have shown remarkable increase in electric vehicles. They have of course developed infrastructure to suit that demand. Compared to that, when we look at the China numbers, they are around 2.3%, and US is slightly more than China, it is around 6%. Incidentally, India is not appearing here in the list as of now because India's penetration is much lower than 1%. But there are going to be obviously a lot of favorable factors which are going to help India to have the huge growth in electric vehicles. So what are the favorable factors? Means world obviously when they would have started 10 years back the journey on electric vehicles, they would have faced a lot of challenges, that there is no demand, then how they are going to create supply infrastructure. But they believed in EV story. They knew that one day it is going to take off. And now if we see, the 5% market share is a huge increase, and it goes to promise to the world that EVs are going to grow now exponentially, because 1 to 5% will always take some time, but it has taken just 5-6 years. So obviously now over next 10 years, 15 years, EV 30 at 30, as I was talking about, is going to be a reality. There are favorable factors, of course, that the advances in battery technology are happening. And we will talk and learn a lot from Suhas that how battery technology is evolving. The mass manufacturing has started, means with China and Europe, they are already investing a lot into mass manufacturing of cars, the batteries. And just to give example, in Europe, a country like Poland is producing a lot of batteries now. China, of course, is the leading manufacturer of lithium-ion batteries. It is pertinent to mention here that governments are very supportive. So China, Europe or US, their governments have given huge subsidy to encourage people to buy. And now they are slowly reducing that subsidy. We in India are also seeing a lot of support coming from the government of India. We also know that EVs are far efficient than the IC engines. So obviously with they getting better and better efficient, we all clearly know that people will start preferring EV vehicles, because their overall cost of ownership will come down. And again, we will see some interesting case study when we talk to Suhas about two-wheelers or four-wheelers, that how EVs are going to be compared to IC engines. So when we talk about driving range, 6 years back it was around 200 kilometers. Now with technology advancement, driving range has almost crossed 350 kilometers. I'm talking about world. And definitely apart from that, what we have seen here now is that the companies who are doing the short range deliveries, they no longer want to use the IC engines, because in a way citizens are not very happy if they are polluting the air there. So that pressure also is intensifying, and they are indirectly saying to companies that please switch over to electric vehicles from IC engines. So we are going to definitely see much increase in the short-term deliveries to be done by electric vehicles. When we look at long-range deliveries, say like trucks, which will be traveling in thousands of miles, 10,000 of miles, we are going to take some time, and we will talk about that also a little later. But these are some of the favorable factors like driving range increase, reduction in battery cost, then companies going with more and more electric vehicles, particularly for the short range deliveries, which will mean that demand is going to be boosted, which is a good sign, because then it will result into further lowering of the cost for the people. What about India? Means India is definitely going to follow the steps from the world. Good thing is for India, or for that matter, I would say even the Middle East, Africa, countries like Thailand, Indonesia, good part is that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So clearly, these countries are going to learn from the, I wouldn't say mistakes, but from the costly investments which happened in the Western world and China. We are going to get best out of it, because 5 years back or 10 years back, the battery cost was 1,000 per kilowatt. Now it is almost coming down to 137. Believe me that battery cost is the biggest contributor to the cost of vehicle, and we will learn more from Suhas when he will talk about that cost. Luckily for India, there is a huge market of vehicles. Means in India, we have close to 20 million two-wheelers getting produced in a year. 20 million is 2 crores, which is a huge number. So even if we get 10% of that moving to electric vehicles in a year, that is going to be 20 lakhs, which is going to clearly change the scenario. A driving range for Indian cars are also on the rise. And as I said, that the technology somewhere else can be transferred here, and there could be a lot of collaborations which could happen. Lot of acquisitions are happening more on the charging side. So we know that there are a lot of investments which are happening by companies, oil companies like Hindustan Petroleum or Indian Oil and even Gulf Oil. They have started investing into the charging infrastructure. So, as we see in India, you first build the building of say 30 floors, and by, when you actually build elevators, people will come and start using elevators. When people come and start staying in the 30-story, then automatically the ecosystem will get developed. A lot of malls will come, schools will come, hospitals will come. Similarly for the EV, in India it is going to happen. The moment people see that the demand is there are less barriers to change, then more and more people are going to adopt. There are going to be support infrastructure which is going to happen. So today there could be some lack of infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. But now companies like Ola Electric, they have already announced that they are going to create a huge network of chargers. They talk about supercharging network. They are going to invest into 100,000 charging points in 100 countries. And to start with, this year, they have plans around 5,000 charging stations, which itself is double than what we have today in India. So just imagine that, companies are already announcing the investment. We also are going to see drop in the price of electric vehicles. And when we look at total cost of ownership, we will see that overall owning electric vehicle will save a lot for people who will drive certain thousand kilometers over the life cycle of the cars. Driving range is definitely improving. We are going to see a lot of fast chargers and also the slow chargers. So when the fast chargers, Ola is already talking about for their two-wheelers, the fast charging of 80% into 18 minutes. And that's going to change the complete dynamics of the industry. Hero is investing a lot. The players like Ather is already there. TVS is investing into two-wheelers. So in our view, two-wheelers will be faster to migrate from IC engines to electric vehicles. And why we say so? Because the charging is not so difficult. You can simply charge at home. In our view, in our assessment, what Suhas and I have been working with the industry, we have seen that two-wheelers and three-wheelers are going to take off electric vehicle journey very quickly, followed by four-wheelers, and then it will take a couple of years, of course, for the heavy-duty vehicles. So Amazon is already investing a lot into electric vehicles for their short-term deliveries. And we are going to see a lot of companies, actually, logistics companies getting into electric vehicles. And there is going to be, obviously, the supportive infrastructure, be it in terms of charging, be it in terms of driving range. Lot of work is going to happen in the battery technology as well. So we will see a lot of R&D going to happen by Indian companies or by global companies coming to engineers in India. So we will see a lot of action on the R&D front as well. And again, when Suhas talks about the opportunities for engineers, for the entrepreneurs, for the corporates, there are n number of opportunities, and that was whole purpose of doing this part 2. So I'm sure that you have found value in this part as well, and we of course are getting into our next important part, where I'm going to have the conversation with Suhas.